Hey Gaurav, it's good to see you.
Hey Demir, how's it going? Great to be here today, talking to
Yeah,
everybody.
doing well. I'm excited as well. Maybe just a quick address to the audience. We're both excited to have this conversation with you all today. Quick intro on myself. I'm Damir Bechirovich. I'm a partner in our New York office at Index Ventures, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Gaurav, the co-founder and CEO of Captions. We led the Series C in Captions earlier this year, and we've loved the working relationship that we've been building, and excited to share some of the reflections on the fundraising journey with everyone here today. Maybe just a little bit more on Index. So we are a global venture capital firm based between San Francisco, New York, London, and investing in companies all the way through Tel Aviv from seed through growth stage. I spend most of my time thinking about the intersection of technology and humanity. So really understanding what are the opportunities to improve the lives of millions of people around the world. Gaurav, maybe you can reciprocate and share a little bit about your background as well.
Yeah, for sure. So, my name is Gaurav. I'm the founder and CEO of Captions, and I started this company with my co-founder Dwight about 3 years ago, well, 3.5 years ago. So we've had a pretty fast growth and a pretty interesting journey. Excited to meet, obviously, Demir along the way and partner with Index. Previously, I was at Snapchat before this, where I spent time being an engineer, a designer, started some teams there with testing early products, and initially, before that, I have a background in machine learning. So, worked as a machine learning engineer for many years across different companies.
Maybe we can just dive right into the topic that people I think are most interested in, which is, how to set their companies up for success with fundraising, especially in this era of AI that's kicking off. If you rewind to the early days of Captions and, you're out raising your seed or Series A, take us back to that moment. What's important to have, in your mind as a founder? What's some advice that you would share?
Totally. I mean, I think we've learned so much along the way, and it's definitely a process and something everybody has to go through in order to learn. I think having an open mind and like kind of, forgetting the rules that you kind of are trained into almost, right? Like working, especially if you worked at companies, like if you're starting a company out of school, maybe you don't have to unlearn this stuff. But if you're working at bigger companies, you have a kind of a career behind you, there's sort of a misconception that kind of the more you experience you have, sort of the more, something you're better somehow at starting a company is helping you start a company. But I think there's a balance. Like I think there's a an amount of time you can spend where you kind of learn how organizations function and dysfunction, right? And then there's a level after which is too much almost, right? And you kind of have to unlearn a little bit to get back to like how does a startup actually succeed? Because a lot of the rules have to be broken, right? A lot of the ways that companies normally operate have to be broken. So I think in those early days, some of the things that we did right, honestly, one of the best things that we did was actually build something before going to investors, right? Because think about it from the investor perspective. I mean, you see this all the time, right? It's hard to figure out like, who's actually just talk and who can actually deliver on something, right? So if you can actually show something functioning, right? Even a prototype of like what you're trying to do, right? That actually differentiates you from a lot of the people that are out there who can talk about it, think of an idea, but can't actually deliver on it, right? So like this is for the very early stages, but I think it makes a very big difference. And especially if you have any kind of traction on it, right? Because then there's a magical combination of like great idea, but also execution. So I think that was one of the key things for us.
Makes sense. And maybe just to kind of share some perspectives as well from the other side of the table, right? Kind of how do we as investors think about investment opportunities? And I think really boiling it down to what is simple is kind of what I was hoping to share. So to me, the investing job is really all about identifying incredible teams going after enormous markets or what could become enormous markets. So um, you know, with that in mind, I think the two are so intertwined, right? So who is the person? What are they motivated to build? Why do they have clarity on, that opportunity? Do they have that deep inherent motivation that is translating to them doing irrational things like building products without, a company even set up? Um, and is that all, with this kind of ambition in mind to build something that can serve millions of people around the world, and that will ultimately translate into a large business. Maybe a good opportunity to share a test that my partner Shardul always mentions to me, which is Demir, when you're looking at a company, how do you think this gets to 1 billion of annual revenue at some point in the future? And, can you start to unpack that even at the earliest of stages? So maybe, I can turn it around back to you and you can comment a little bit on, why this space even at all? Like how did you land on video, enabling creators to create videos in a novel way? Would love to talk a little bit more about, yeah, captions and the product itself.
Totally. I mean, I think picking a space and picking a product and picking something to work on is just such a hard thing. I think like the earliest days of a startup, especially if you're just getting started, I think are going to be the hardest thing. I think, of course, there's a mindset question here. Like you have to be really in the mindset of like being able to abandon anything that, not getting too attached to what you build, basically, right? Like being able to quickly move on, be honest and, really honest with yourself about like what's working and what's not working and what needs to change, right? But I think generally picking a space, there's a lot of luck involved in it, right? I think what can happen is sometimes you find product market fit in something that maybe isn't a massive thing, right? Maybe it is kind of limited at 100 million revenue, maybe even smaller, right? And it can't get to a billion or 2 billion or 10 billion, who knows, right? But I think in order to maximize your chances of picking a great space, I think you have to look at the end of the day, the underlying shifts in society, right? What is already changing, right? And I think oftentimes this tends to be fundamental technology changes, right? For example, even as simple as like, oh, there's 4G, 5G, there's just more internet for more people and it's faster. Does that mean more people will use video? Probably. I mean, I think, I was at Snapchat before this, and I gotta say, like, at the end of the day, internet was pretty important to Snapchat growing in any new market, right? If there was more mobile internet available, higher bandwidth available, sending video back and forth is faster, easier, and more acceptable to people, right? And so those are like the types of fundamental technology changes, but also societal changes, right? How are people doing things? What do they want to do? What's cool? What's not cool? Just generally, right? All that stuff matters. And if there's massive shifts happening, you want to look at those shifts and understand how the world is going to be different at the end of those shifts and where your company's place is going to be there in solving some major problem in the new world, right? And I think if you can imagine that, that's a company, right? That's probably a big market. So
Right.
for us, it comes down to like video as like a growing communication medium, right? Especially short video. And that was like a fundamental worldwide phenomenon, right? And that means that more people need to create video, more people need to communicate, talk, right? Say something, sell something, market something, right? And that was global and universal, right? Every language, every country, right? And then more recently, in the last few years, AI has really taken off. Like it's something we really were excited about in the beginning of the company, but what we thought would take like 10 years, just by luck here, became much faster and became a couple of years, right? But that's another technological change that's causing a massive shift, right? Massive underlying shift. Something that, if you attach yourself to and you see kind of where the world's going and you can place yourself at the end of it, it was like, this is where my company will play a role in this. I think that's kind of setting a vision, right? So I think part of it is luck. Part of it is like, in retrospect is easier to do, right? But those are some of the key ingredients, I think.
Yeah. And maybe just double click on one thing you said, which is this kind of earned insight. I mean, one of the things that I still so viscerally remember from spending time with you and learning about your business is this insight that, short form video specifically is what's growing around the world. And then what is actually in that video is a lot of people speaking to cameras, similar to how we're doing right now. And that, presents a really unique opportunity to shape a product and enable that type of creation to be a lot more, streamlined, efficient, make it really easy to edit, translate it into many different languages, and, make that kind of the scope. And that actually is in and of itself quite large. And over time, you earn the right to go much further. And we can get back to, what I'm getting at with those notes is maybe some notion of defensibility and defining your problem space, and we can get back to that. But maybe just to wrap up the fundraising part of the interview here, would love for you to just chat a little bit about the experience of actually meeting investors. How do you build a relationship with them? What resonated with you through that process? And I can, of course, share, how we think about it as well. How do we go out and choose who to invest time in and learn about and ultimately, seek to partner with. But would love to start with you and what your experience was like.
Of course, yeah. I mean, I think the experience kind of shifts from the early stages to, later rounds basically. And I think in the earliest stages, you are looking for someone who believes in you. I think at the end of the day, truly, right? Like the idea will probably change. Maybe it'll be similar, maybe it'll be completely different. Oftentimes it tends to be absolutely different, right? Like way unexpected. And if someone truly believes in you, they'll see kind of the logical steps and, how you're deciding and how you're going about this process. They'll probably be the type of person who will spend a lot of time with you, will meet with you every other week, every 3 weeks or something like that. Maybe they have operational experience of some sort, where they've seen like how to build early products and they've worked with other companies, but it's very difficult to find, definitely. It's like, I think the marriage analogy is actually, a lot of people talk about it, is actually kind of real because you are stuck together, whether you like it or not, right? After that. And you want to make sure it's a person that you can really get along with and you get, the right type of advice from. And I think on advice too, you know, I think the best help, it's almost a little bit kind of can be like therapy in a way. And I'm sure the investors like hate this idea because it's like, is this free therapy? But I think in a way you can kind of honestly talk about a lot of your problems, especially at the early stage. An investor might listen to it, give their perspective of like, well, these are some of the things you might run into. These are some of the problems that might come up. These are some of the opportunities that may exist in this with this plan, right? But I think the best ones won't like force you to do one thing or the other. Like if you ever kind of talk to investors who are thinking about like forcing you to do this or that, or not letting you have sort of independence in figuring out the product direction and the company direction. I think yeah, you don't want to probably work with those types of people. But ideal person you want to work with, I think you get along with really well. You're going to be working together for a long time. Can give you great advice, but doesn't force it, right? And if you make a different decision, they're totally okay with helping figure it out in this new path, right? So I think that's the early stages. I think the later stages, some of those things still hold true, right? But I think the complexity grows very quickly, right? Because it's not just about product now. There's many, many other elements of making a business work, which are actually very business oriented, for lack of a better. It's not just the product. The product is important and it still needs to be doing the same thing that it was doing and better. But there's like, the finance side of things. There's the company building side of things. There's like so many other different things that you can actually learn quite a bit from investors because they are seeing many different companies, they're seeing many different scenarios, and you can get good advice. I think key thing here again is like, every company makes it for a different reason. It's never the same thing over and over again, right? If there was a playbook to make a successful company, there would be a billion successful companies, right? So everyone has to rediscover that journey. I think it's important to take that advice, understand what to do with it, right? And then make the right decision for your company, right? Not just blindly follow it, of course. So you get the benefit of experience, but you get to apply kind of what you think is the right thing to do, right? And maybe forge a brand new path that investors will talk about in the future and tell other companies, right? So I think that's kind of the type of relationship you want to have. I think that's like what we've, got to build with Index over here, obviously with Demir Yu, and previously with other investors as well. And, it's probably the most important interview you will do almost I think, right? And because it kind of is an interview, you should be talking to investors in a way of like, hey, like, is this a person that I want to be working with for a very, very long time, right? And that's really important. So at the core of it, if they believe in you, they believe in your idea, I think that's very important.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I almost don't view it as like through a business lens anymore, right? I used to think work and personal life are these two things you keep separate, but I think, overall my learnings over the years have been that life is one and the same. What do we want? We want to be around people that inspire us, that motivate us, that compel us. We want to feel a little electrocuted by the people that we spend time with. And so what does that mean, in the context of us looking to invest in, and support founders, right? It means finding someone who has that large scale ambition, but also the competency to translate what they kind of are building as a vision in their mind into something that is real and tangible and being used and actually having impact. So motivation and competency are kind of the things that, we spend a lot of time trying to figure out on the way in. And then, once we make the decision to join the founder on their journey, then we're in it. Similar to what you said, there's no more doubt. Like we are now on the same team. We're going to weather storms as they arise. We're going to figure out problems and solve them. But we now see ourselves as being on the same side of the table, and we're aligned, right? We want this company to be the biggest company possible. We want the product to be the most compelling product in the world. We want to attract the best talent in the world around us. And so, to me, it's probably the part of my job that I love the most is coming into your office, every week in New York and just getting at least a brief sensation that, I'm on the captions team and, I get a sneak peek at what you're building. And to me, it's the biggest honor of doing this line of work. Um, maybe would love to transition a little bit and talk about exactly kind of what I touched on at the end there. Like, what does life at Captions right now look like? I mean, AI, as the previous panel touched on, is this chaotic space. Things are changing by the day. That new models are being released just about every day. Uh, how do you kind of manage through this, and how are you building a culture within Captions that can actually thrive in an environment like this? Would love to touch on that.
100%. I mean, I think as you know, like it's a unique time, right? Like I feel like in my career, I've never actually experienced a time like this, and it's all new for me in that sense too, right? Because normally, like, and I talk about this a bunch, but like in the normal state of the world, right? Like most good ideas are already consumed, right? Like, which is why it's so hard to start a company because like you want to think about something and oh, like you think about one thing and it's like, oh, it's already done and somebody already tried it and work. Maybe I could try it a different way, right? That's because like that's just the nature of capitalism, right? Like every good idea, every opportunity to make money will be consumed faster than you can think of it, right? Because you're competing against the entire world on being first, right? Being first to figure something out, being first to find that arbitrage, that way to make money that nobody else thought about, right? But I think there's few moments that happen every once in a while. And I think the AI era is one of those moments. Those rare moments where a fundamental shift creates so many opportunities, so many possibilities that there's just not enough people in the world to actually take on all of it. And literally millions, sometimes thousands to millions of ideas and ways to use technology to solve problems are just sitting out there. You can talk about them. You can be like, yeah, we could do this and we could do that. And after that, this other thing could be possible and this fourth thing. And nobody ever applied it to this area. And yeah, no one's doing any of these things. Like no one has even tried them, right? And they seem obvious. Like, why hasn't anyone tried them? Because there's too many things and too few people, right? And I think in that type of an environment, you have to have like a different approach to almost running the company, right? Like you want to explore as quickly as possible all the different areas where there is real value. Like some of this is real, some of it may not be real, right? Like so you want to get to know a little bit of like what the landscape actually looks like. I think the time will not last forever, right? Like there's going to be it's like a pendulum swinging either way, right? There's going to be a time where there's going to be too many people working in this space and too few ideas all of a sudden, right? Because things will settle down a little bit. Maybe that's a few years away. But until then, the best thing to do is like to continue to innovate and focus on innovation as a company. That's something we focus quite a bit on. Like, how do we move fast? How do we prioritize as much as possible? Like, we've kind of kept the company slightly underhired generally because we want to make sure that, we have fewer people than we need so that we can actually only work on the highest priority things, teach people prioritization so that they can look at, hey, I could be doing 10 different things right now. What actually is the most important thing? How do I figure that out, right? It's actually something that people don't have to worry about too much in normal times, right? Because in normal times, there's only one thing to do. And I guess we're doing that one thing. And oops, it didn't work, or it did work, or whatever, right? But now it's like, well, there's 10 possible things I could do. Which one should I be doing, right? How do I figure out what has the maximum ROI? Is something that a skill that people don't even get a chance to really practice. So I think building that culture, building a company that is, we're also in person, 5 days a week, which is like very unconventional, but I think it creates the right environment for a true like startup experience, a true, you know, what people think about, what people watch movies about almost in a way, right? Like having that be actually real and having that level of opportunity and impact available to you I think is very liberating for a lot of people.
Yeah. And one of the concepts that you raise is essentially this concept of like exploration versus exploitation, right? So can you explore the universe and what's out there? And then when you find the gold mines, can you go deep and capture them before someone else comes across the gold mine? And I'm very curious what that means for how you make decisions at Capture. It's like, is it very top down? Like you're saying right now we're in explore mode to define what the next feature could be, or is it bottoms up? You know, some engineer or product person on your team is, you know, curious about something, stumbles into an area, and then escalates until it makes its way on the roadmap. Would love to get a sense of how that's working right now.
Yeah, and we've been doing a pretty unique process from that perspective. So we do essentially like a quarterly brainstorm. We do like a offsite and everything, and we do a quarterly brainstorm where everybody in the company, no matter what the role, so like this is not like just product engineering or something. We have marketing, we have recruiting, we have anybody who's in the company participate in this, and essentially come up with as many ideas as we can directionally in the space that we're going into of like what could be interesting to add to the app. And then we kind of all vote on it on this big, like we get like hundreds and hundreds of ideas. So we vote on it and try to figure out like what the popular areas are, rank them, and then with the product team try to figure out like what we can build and what's interesting. So that actually ends up a lot of times creating ideas that the best ones are the ones that only one person came up with, but everybody voted on because that's a rare idea. That's like a good idea because hard to think of, but when you see it, you know it's a good idea, right? That's like those are tend to be the types of things that surprise the market. People are just like, wow, unexpected use case, very interesting, right? And then you get a lot of copying and like people shifting their roadmaps, which is something you really want to do, right? Lead the way build because you think users want this, not because competitors built it. And then you'll see the market will naturally evolve to go down the way that you're going. That's just how it works. So to be that leader, you have to have sort of this type of thinking, right, where you're kind of really focusing on innovation and really focusing on your customer, your roadmap, and how you're leading the way in the industry.
And any other thoughts, you know, related to this on just the general topic of defensibility? And it was mentioned in the previous panel as well, right? The fear around AI companies is that you're building a thin layer on top of some model, and you know, unless you really define some complex workflow that you own, you know, there's going to be a litany of competitors that emerge, and you know, the business models will erode, and you know there just won't be any value created. So I'm very curious how you think about that in the context of your business. Like, how do you think over time you're going to kind of increasingly insulate yourself against competition?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of like defensibility, I think in the long run, I mean, except for like monopolistic defensibility, which also exists, you know, if you can find that, that's great. But I think besides that, the best defensibility in the long run tends to be brand. Like if you have a great brand, it takes a generation to build one and a generation to destroy one as well. Um, and that's probably the long-term defensibility you want to build as a company. I think in order to build that, you have to have short-term moats. And by short-term, they could be like 5 year, 10 year, like something like that, right? Even in that range, where you have protection for that time as you're working on building your brand and increasing your reach of your company. And so I think in the AI era, it tends to be, you know, data is one of them because if you have proprietary data at scale, then, you know, you can have a unique model that you can train from it that other people won't be able to have the same one. Like they'll be able to have a model, but it won't be that one because your data is unique and proprietary, right? You can have research as a moat essentially where you hired the right people, done research in a, and ideally like in that you don't compete with bigger companies that like you probably don't want to train LLMs, right? For example, right? But you might be able to find like a specific thing that the LLM companies aren't doing, right? Maybe even if it is an LLM, but it's a specific type of LLM, right? That maybe the other companies won't focus on. Or some other type of model that's like more in domain for your user, your customer, and other people won't want to train that. And you can be the best at it because maybe you have customer data you can enhance your model with or something like that. So I think research can be a good one as well, especially right now where talent is pretty tight. If you can get the right talent, you can be, you know, pretty defensible there. And then finally, workflows, UX, design. These are classic ones. I think they always help. Um, I think in order for them to be really defensible, you have to really be exceptional at them and really go above and beyond. So I think focusing, like we focus on being a design-driven company in terms of like really focusing on, the user experience, really focusing on what the product feels like to the customer, really obsessing about the customer. So I think that can matter quite a bit as well. And at the end of the day, if you have like developed deep workflows for specific use cases and things like that, I think that helps kind of like lock in certain types of customers.
And maybe this is a good time for me to just do a shout out and say, to everyone listening, please download the Captions app. I think, going through the onboarding flow, trying the product will really bring to life a lot of what Gaurav just mentioned around, how he thinks about building a defensible AI-driven product. Um, I know we're just about up on time. Would love to maybe close by just having you share like a last bit of wisdom with the people listening. Like, is there, a single piece of advice that, you think people should keep in their mind at the end of the panel here around fundraising in this era of AI?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one thing that I think, especially at the early stage of fundraising, is like not to get too caught up on things like valuation and things like that, right? And also like I think there's some misconceptions around like, oh, like the valuation was 20 million, so my company's worth 20 million now. But I think the reality is like the valuation is almost a target for you now, right? And it's like kind of what you're aiming to go towards. And it doesn't immediately make the company worth 20 million. So I think keeping that open mind about like valuation doesn't matter that much. Ownership percentage, maybe a little bit more, and thinking about that a little bit more. But ideally, you want enough cash flow, enough sort of cash coming into the company that you can continue operating, you can build what you need to build, and you can continue moving forward. So not getting caught up in some of those details, I think is, probably a good thing.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And I think, we see it similarly. Like we want people to be motivated by the long-term potential, right? And getting to, that large scale impact and, the little milestones along the way, they should be celebrated briefly, but then you move forward and continue on your journey and your mission. And that's one of the things that I appreciate the most about you. You are only moving faster as you raise more capital.
No, it's
And yeah,
exciting. And
what a pleasure to chat with you. It was fun to do this.
likewise, thank you for having me here.